Chapter 1. Isaac favored Esau, while Jacob was Rebekah's favorite. We cannot talk about the man who fought with God without first discussing the journey that led him to that fight. After Abraham had been chosen by God to be the father of a nation which would be called out from the nations of the earth and had been blessed by God, he lived a long life and then died. His son Isaac was to carry on the blessing to the next generation. Isaac's wife Rebekah was barren and had no child, so Isaac prayed to God about it. God answered his prayers and Rebekah conceived. While she was pregnant, the children within her struggled, and she was wondering what was going on. She inquired of God, and the Lord said to her that there were 2 nations within her, and the elder will serve the younger. When she finally gave birth, she gave birth to twins. The firstborn was Esau, and the second was Jacob. Naturally, at that time the person who inherited the father's property and who received the greatest blessing from the father was the firstborn. Isaac favored Esau, while Jacob was Rebekah's favorite. Isaac was going to give Esau the blessing, but Jacob and his mother had other plans. Esau was a hunter and a man of the field, while Jacob dwelled more in tents. One of those days, when Esau came home exhausted from hunting and extremely hungry, Jacob had cooked stew, and Esau asked him to give him part of it. Jacob was cunning and saw that as an opportunity to trade something, so he asked Esau to sell him his birthright. Esau was so famished that he accepted this. It seemed hunger had blinded his eyes to see the danger in this. In fact, he said in Genesis chapter 25 verse 32, "Look, I am about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" Hunger made him make a foolish decision, and that led to great pain for him in the future. He chose the satisfaction of the present over his future, and Esau swore an oath to Jacob, selling him his birthright. This one decision changed the trajectory of Esau's life and proved the reason why Jacob was chosen over Esau to carry on the lineage that started from Abraham. Esau's decision was further explained in Hebrews chapter 12 verses 16 to 17, which says, "See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterwards, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change of mind, though he sought the blessing with tears. He made a mistake that was impossible to reverse because he was hungry. He chose food over his inheritance, and that decision cost him a lot. This was not the end of the strife between the brothers. When Isaac became old and was getting closer to the time when he would die, he decided to bless his firstborn Esau, and Rebekah found out. At this time Isaac was old and could no longer see, so Rebekah made a plan. Isaac asked Esau to hunt wild game for him and prepare it for him to eat, after which he would bless, and Esau went on that mission. Knowing that it would take Esau some time to successfully hunt the game and prepare it for his father, Rebekah got to work. She asked Jacob to bring 2 young goats for her to prepare as a meal for Isaac, and covered Jacob's skin with the goat skin, because Jacob had smooth skin while Esau was a hairy man. Rebekah also dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes, all in an effort to deceive Isaac. Jacob went along with this and presented himself to his father as Esau, with the goat meat his mother had cooked and the bread she had prepared. He decided to deceive his father to obtain the firstborn blessing. Of course, his father could not see whether it was Esau or Jacob that was serving him, but he tried to use his other senses by touching him and listening to his voice. He thought the voice sounded like that of Jacob, but his skin felt like that of Esau. He was confused, but decided to believe it was Esau. He must not have imagined that Jacob would deceive him to obtain his blessing. Isaac ate the meal that Jacob had brought and asked him to draw closer and kiss him. Genesis chapter 27 verses 27 to 29 continues the story, saying, "So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, 'Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of heaven's dew, and of earth's richness, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed.' Not long after Jacob had left his father, Esau arrived from his hunting trip. Not knowing all that had happened, he prepared the meat and went in to serve his father. Isaac was confused and asked him who he was, since he had already given the blessing to Jacob, who he thought was Esau. Esau identified himself. It was then Isaac realized he had been deceived. He pleaded with his father to bless him also. Isaac told Esau of Jacob's deception, and Esau was hurt. Genesis chapter 27 verses 37 to 40 says, Isaac answered Esau, I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son? Esau said to his father, Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. Then Esau wept aloud. His father Isaac answered him, Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. While Jacob was able to deceive his father into obtaining the blessing of the firstborn, Isaac blessed Esau still. He blessed him by saying he would be free from serving Jacob when he grew restless. This means that he would not have to be a servant to Jacob forever. Chapter 2. Just as Jacob succeeded in deceiving his father, he had also been deceived by Laban. After Esau found out about how Jacob stole the blessing from him, he was so angry he said he was going to kill Jacob. Their story would have been like Cain and Abel, but Rebekah heard of his plans. She told Jacob of his plan and sent him away from the family to her brother Laban, so that he could be safe from his brother's wrath, and so that his anger would subside. Jacob was supposed to return when Esau was no longer angry, and so he took the long journey down to where his uncle lived. Rebekah made it seem to Isaac as if Jacob was going to meet Laban solely to get a wife, but this was her way of keeping him from Esau. Isaac agreed and blessed Jacob, sending him on his way. So Jacob set out on a journey to his uncle, and on his first night he slept in a certain place, making a stone his pillow. That night he had a strange dream. He saw that there was a staircase from the earth to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on the staircase. This location was very important, because this was where he later had the fight that changed his life for good. This was not all he saw. In Genesis chapter 28 verses 13 to 15 he saw there above it stood the Lord. And he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west, and to the east, to the north, and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Jacob encountered God at this location. God spoke to him of his future, and when he woke up he called the place Bethel and made a vow to God there. He continued his journey till he arrived in the town his uncle lived in. The first family member he met there was Rachel, Laban's daughter, who was taking care of her father's sheep. He told her that he was her relative, and so Rachel ran and informed her family. Laban welcomed Jacob with open arms and embraced him. After Jacob had been staying with them for about a month, apparently Jacob had been working for Laban without getting paid, so Laban asked him what his wages should be, since it would not be fair for Jacob to continue working for him for free, even though he was his relative. You would have thought that Jacob would have asked for some sheep or a plot of land to grow some plants, but Jacob was in love. He had fallen for Rachel, and that was who he asked for instead of wages. He made the terms himself and told Laban that he would work for 7 years for Rachel. Jacob worked for Laban for 7 years, and after that time he asked Laban for his wife. He must have really loved her. However, Laban was crafty. Instead of giving Rachel to Jacob in marriage, he took Leah to Jacob in the night. Jacob had consummated the marriage with her, and so there was no breaking the bond. It wasn't until morning before Jacob realized that the one he married was not the one he loved. He had married Leah instead of Rachel. The pain he felt must have been great. The interesting part was that just as Jacob succeeded in deceiving his father, he had also been deceived by Laban. He felt the same pain his brother and his father must have felt. Laban, the story did not end there, though. Jacob confronted Laban, and Laban claimed that it was their custom for the first daughter to be married first, and that was why he made the decision to give Leah to Jacob first. He gave Rachel to Jacob in exchange for Jacob's labor for another 7 years, because Jacob really loved Rachel and wanted to marry her, so he served Laban 7 more years for free. After serving 7 years for Rachel, Laban begged Jacob to stay again. He claimed to have learned by divination that God blessed him because of Jacob. The blessing that Isaac has pronounced on Jacob had caused Laban and his household to be blessed. Laban asked Jacob to name his wages again, and this time Jacob asked for the lamb, sheep and goat that were dark and spotted out of Laban's flock. Laban agreed to Jacob's wages but went behind his back to remove all the sheep, goats and lamb that were dark or spotted and put them in the care of his sons. He was trying once again to cheat and deceive Jacob. Jacob took fresh cut branches from some trees and peeled them. He placed these branches in all the watering troughs, and when the animals came to drink and mated before the watering troughs, they gave birth to animals that were spotted or dark. So Jacob made sure that when the weak animals came to the watering troughs to mate, he removed the peeled branches from the troughs, and when they were strong animals, he would place them in. So the spotted or dark animals were the strong ones, while the plain ones were weak. Jacob had the strong animals of the flock, while Laban had the weak. Jacob separated the spotted and dark animals from Laban's flock and grew a strong flock for himself. This way he was able to gather wealth, even though he started with nothing. He acquired camels, donkeys, and a lot of wealth. With great wealth comes problems. Because of the way Jacob had amassed wealth, Laban's sons began speaking poorly of him, saying that Jacob took all their father owned and gained his wealth from all that belonged to their father, and even Laban's attitude towards him changed. Remember, it was Laban in the first place that deceived Jacob and tried to cheat him of his wages. He even changed Jacob's wages 10 times, yet he was trying to make Jacob feel guilty for becoming wealthy. God spoke to Jacob and asked him to leave and go back to the land of his fathers. So he called his wives and informed them of his plans to go back home, especially with the way their father was treating him, and they agreed with him. Jacob, his wives, his children, and all that he owned left, and went on a journey back to his family without telling Laban. Rachel, Jacob's wife, had stolen Laban's gods when they were leaving, and because of this Laban chased after Jacob when he caught up to him. He berated him because he left without telling him or allowing say goodbye to his daughters and his grandchildren. He also told Jacob that someone had stolen his gods, but Jacob denied this because he did not know that Rachel had. When Laban searched, he found nothing, but Jacob became angry and reminded Laban of how hard he had worked when he served, and that he had served him for 14 years and 6 extra years for his wages. It was after this that Laban and Jacob made a covenant not to cross over to the territory of the other to harm them in any way. After this, Jacob continued on his journey and Laban went back home. Chapter 3. It was when he was alone that he had an encounter that changed his life. Jacob was still afraid of his brother, Esau. He had no idea what he should expect when he returned home. When he ran away, his brother was angry enough to entertain the thought of killing him, and Jacob had no idea if he had changed his mind. This was why Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to Esau, so they could speak to him on his behalf and inform him of his situation. He gave them specific instructions to tell Esau that he was doing well and would like to return, and to tell him if the cattle he had, the servants with him, the fact that he had stayed with Laban till that time, and that he was seeking favor in the sight of Esau. The messengers returned to him and told him that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. Jacob must have been scared, because meeting him with that number of men could mean that he had not forgiven Jacob, and he was so angry that he wanted to fight him and all that was coming with him. Esau would not be aware of the hardship that Jacob had faced to get to where he was. The pain of deception Jacob had felt after deceiving his father and stealing his brother's blessing. Jacob suffered so much because of that deception, but Esau did not know. Jacob must have assumed the worst, because he decided to divide their traveling party into 2 groups, including the livestock. He planned, thinking that if Esau attacked one group, the other group may escape. He was planning for battle with his brother, even though he knew nothing about fighting. Where his brother was a skilled hunter, Jacob was a shepherd. Genesis chapter 32 verses 9 to 12 records, "Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, "Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." From praying, Jacob also separated some of his livestock and camels as gifts for his brother. He knew God had instructed him to go back home, but he was also scared of his brother, so he did everything he could to appease him. He divided his servants into different traveling parties and placed different livestock under their care to give Esau as gifts and to inform him of his coming, hoping that his gifts would cause Esau to receive him. He, his wives, his two maidservants, and his sons were left behind. After a while Jacob sent them and all his belongings ahead of him, and he was finally alone. Because of how greatly he feared his brother, Jacob had sent all that were with him ahead of him. It was when he was alone that he had an encounter that changed his life. Chapter 4. He wrestled with God till he received blessings from God. That night Jacob wrestled with a man. They kept wrestling, and none overpowered the other till it was almost daybreak. When the man saw that it would be difficult to overpower Jacob and leave Jacob, he touched the socket of his hip, and his thigh was put out of joint. In spite of this, Jacob would not let him go, so the man asked Jacob to get him to go as it was almost daybreak, but Jacob refused him, telling him that he would not let him go until he blessed him. Their conversation continued in Genesis chapter 32 verses 27 to 29, which says, the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name," but he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. The impact of this blessing may not be completely understood if you do not know the meaning of Jacob's name. His name meant supplanter. Biblically, names defined how people's lives would go. That was why God changed Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah. A name could be a curse or a blessing. So for Jacob to be named supplanter, it meant that he would always be the one who wrongfully steals the place of another. His name was like a prophecy he had spent his whole fulfilling. While he had received his father's blessing, he still suffered from the implication of his name. The name he received was Israel, which meant one who prevails with God. That day Jacob wrestled with God, and his life changed forever and for good. His name went on to be the name of a nation, and his children became the tribes of a nation. That encounter changed his life and the life of his family. He wrestled with God till he received blessings from God. He must have been desperate for him to have continued, even though his hip was shifted out of place. He knew that if God blessed him, then he could be assured of his blessing. He named that place Peniel because he saw God face to face and his life was spared. Jacob knew what hardship looked like. He noticed how even though he got his father's blessing, he suffered so much, and he seemed to be laboring under a curse. He did not know exactly what was wrong, but he knew that he had to wrestle till God blessed him, and he did exactly that. He left that place a changed man, no longer Jacob the supplanter, but the father of the nation of Israel. When Jacob saw Esau approaching him, he divided his children among two maidservants, Leah and Rachel, and sent them one after the other. He went after all of them and bowed before his brother Esau. He still had no idea what to expect from him, but at that moment what he never imagined happened. Esau ran towards him and embraced him. All the fear of a battle, all the worry dissolved. The pain between them and the anger all disappeared, and all that was left was just two brothers who had missed themselves greatly and had lost many years that could have been spent together. They both wept, and Esau noticed Jacob's family, who all came and bowed to him. Esau also received the gifts that Jacob had prepared for him. He wanted to accompany Jacob on the journey back, but Jacob asked him to go ahead because he could not journey fast because of his children. So Esau and Jacob became at peace once again and lived at peace with each other. Jacob had spent so much time afraid and worried of how his return home would be, that he may not have returned home at all, if not because God instructed him to, not knowing that his brother had forgiven him for all that he had done wrong. He stole the firstborn blessing, yet he was still bowing down to Esau because his means of receiving the blessing was wrong. He almost ruined the bond of family just because of his greed, but he had another chance with his brother and he was forgiven. He went on to live a full, long life with his 12 sons, which were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, who went on to be the tribes of Israel. He lived on his father's land and was prosperous. He was wealthy and blessed. Jacob started greedy and supplanted his brother. He did all he did without thinking of the consequences, but still, he was the one chosen by God to carry on the line of Abraham. He was not the firstborn, yet he was the one who received the promise Abraham had received. It took years of hardship and service to Laban before his character grew and before he changed. The same Jacob who stole his brother's birthright was willing to bow to him and had his family do the same. Jacob grew and became a better person than he was before, and that was why the blessing of having his name changed from Jacob to Israel was an important one. He went from a boy who wanted to take all that his brother had and make them his to a man who would wrestle with God to receive the blessing. Jacob was a blessed man who lived his life to the fullest, and when his days were over he also blessed his children. In his time he did not only try to bless the firstborn line his father Isaac did, he blessed all his children from the first to the last, and even blessed the children of his son Joseph. He and his family had moved to Egypt in time of famine, and he took his last breath in Egypt.